So a lot of my videos have been centered around me, my personal feelings, my thoughts, my emotions around things. But today I want to talk about something a little bit different. Obviously I'm going to still be centering it from my perspective, but I want to talk about kind of the wider industry and the impact that one game in particular had, the subject of today's video, and that is Tomb Raider. So for the purposes of this video, I'll be checking out the Tomb Raider I-III Remastered Anniversary Edition. And actually, if you've just noticed, there's a new challenge mode update that was just added to the game. It's a free update. Essentially, it adds 10 new achievements, it adds some new costumes, there's some modifiers and difficulty settings, and it also has announced the game for both mobile and Nintendo Switch too. So there's never been a better time to come and check it out and play the game. But that's not what I wanted to talk about in today's video. So basically, as someone who kind of grew up when Tomb Raider was kind of first, on the scene, someone who grew up with Lara Croft very much around in the zeitgeist, and just the general impact on that moment to moment that happened in the industry at that time as someone who was passively interested in it, I just thought that my perspective would be quite interesting here. So as I mentioned previously on other videos, that my favorite game is Monkey Island, right? I loved point-and-click adventures growing up. And there was a strange thing that was happening around the time of Tomb Raider coming and the 3D games kind of, coming into the space. The games that I was loving, that kind of 8 to 16-bit era kind of games that I'd grown up with were starting to lose their muster. And I think this felt to me, like obviously, people who'd previously gone from 8-bit to 16-bit had probably felt this much deeper. But as a kid, this felt like the first generational leap. And it felt like to me that games that I had loved were being left behind. And so in a strange way, I think I might have resented Tomb Raider a bit at the time. Because what was happening to me, like I mentioned, I'd been playing games like Sam & Max and Day of the Tentacle and, Full Throttle and Torrance Passage, Tombstrike, games like that, Broken Sword. Games that I would just like, they captured me. I loved a good story. I loved kind of the compelling adventures. And even the classic platformers as they were seen in that 16-bit space, the side-scrolling element, like those were becoming less interesting to the wider demographic who wanted more power and they wanted to push the envelope. They wanted to make games feel more real. They wanted to get out of this kind of entertainment space in a way and start getting closer to achieve that wider dream, which we're at today, I guess, in many respects. Games have never looked more real as they do now. But because of that, I think there was a part of me that refused to move with that. It was very strange in a way. Like and this seems strange to say because we all know the real impact of Tomb Raider. Well, there's a couple of things that happened here, but the real impact of Tomb Raider is the fact that it put a woman front and center and made a woman the protagonist of a game. Really gave women a voice in the games industry. And this is I guess this is what, trying to explain this and roll back a little bit. This is what made it strange to me because I'd grown up in a household where women played games, right? My mother was a big gamer. My mother played all the games with me. Like she played games like Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective. There was some Sherlock Holmes games that she loved. She played the Discworld games with me. She played Dungeon Keeper with me. My Magic Carpet. My mother would just play so many games with me when I was growing up that the idea of a woman playing games didn't feel strange to me in any way. And same with my sister. My sister really had mentioned, she couldn't interact as well with as many others, but she loved Sonic the Hedgehog, she loved Mario. She was as just into it as anyone else, right? So this idea just felt strange to me that people were sort of like, oh, girls don't play games, women don't play games. They absolutely effing do. And I grew up in a house that attested to that. But I heard it on the playground a lot, like, oh, girls don't play games, so I don't want to talk to her about it. She's never played anything. And this girl would be telling me, like, talking about Mario Brothers 3, like, in detail, at the same time with this boy is just telling me, like, she doesn't know anything about this. It was kind of weird, right? There was a weird perception around that. And so I think, getting to that point is that Tomb Raider was such a big moment for girl gamers everywhere who had never had the chance to actually say, girls play games too. And I think that was a big part of their marketing strategy. And it was just part of this very smart zeitgeist of happenings that really ushered the change that we're seeing today in the games industry. But I think, you know, like, just getting back to the point of the reason why I felt weird, it's nothing to do with Lara Croft. Like, in fact, I became a big fan of Lara Croft. Absolutely loved, like, the feel of Tomb Raider, and I'll get to that in a moment. But when that game was emerging, when all the marketing was everywhere, when, you know, people were pushing that this is the 3D is the future of gaming, and this, there was something in my head that just wasn't falling for it. I wasn't going with this, you know, like. But I mean, this was happening more and more. Like, Tomb Raider was obviously the start. There were games like Die by the Sword that came out from Interplay. You know, Descent was a big title. You know, I mentioned going back to, you know, like games like Doom, and then obviously it went to Duke Nukem, and then it went to, you know, games like Redneck Rampage and Interstate 76. There was just this strange mix of games that were just, you know, really just kind of appearing more and more and more. And so, you know, my games that I loved were just going by the wayside. And I mentioned, you know, like, you know, point and click adventures tried to kind of follow that space a little bit, you know, like you know, if you look at Discworld Noir, for instance, you know, that had this kind of like 3D models that were presented in a point and click environment. And then there were games like The Vampire Story, which tried similar things. But that essence of a hand-drawn, side-scrolling, beautiful world, pixel art, it was dying a death. It's so interesting to see it now as it had a renaissance now only in recent years, you know, like from indie game development has really played a massive instrumental part in bringing back pixel art. But to me, as someone who was just, you know, I really loved those point and click adventures, and they meant so much to me, and to see them be kind of like pushed away by this big shadow of Tomb Raider, just kind of like, you know, there it is, you know, Tomb Raider is taking over everything, it's in all the magazine advertising and everything. So I think I kind of hated Tomb Raider for that, which is, it sounds so silly to say it now, but, you know, as a teenager growing up with this mindset of I love these particular things and something else is trying to take that away from me, because, you know, I was reading the magazines, right? You could quite clearly see in magazines that press and attention was going further and further away from point and click adventures. It made sense, because that was what was getting people to buy magazines, because people wanted to know about what's happening with Duke Nukem, what's happening with Doom, what's happening with Tomb Raider. You know, those were the games that people were buying magazines for. And then obviously then you get the football, you know, like games like FIFA were really starting to emerge as well. So, like, you know, people were more interested in that sort of thing. And no one really cared about Sam & Max 2, which ended up getting cancelled. And I think that was the game that broke my heart the most, because I'd been following magazines about it. I've been following everything I could about this sequel to Sam & Max that LucasArts were working on, and it got cancelled. And, you know, famously it was then brought back in some respects by Telltale Games years and years later. But, you know, that moment, I think, to me. And then when I heard about how The Dig, I was reading about how The Dig was this great game, but like it's not sure LucasArts were going to be able to release another one because they couldn't justify it. And then they started going down the X-Men versus TIE Fighter route and Dark Forces, you know, just to kind of match what was going on with the trends in the industry. And I was just seeing Tomb Raider specifically as the reason all this was happening, and I think I put a lot of my frustration into that. And it's so wild because, like I said, you know, like Tomb Raider was so important in so many other ways. Like, you know, there were lots of things happening at the same time. You had full motion video games were trying to become a thing. You know, games like Seventh Guest and 11th Hour, and you know, obviously you mentioned Night Trap in a previous video. You know, there was a big push for trying to get full motion video to be a thing. You have 3D gaming as mentioned there, which I'm talking about Tomb Raider. You know, and just like there was lots of and even 32-bit platformers, right? So I mean, that was obviously a thing. You know, you could see that segue into the PlayStation era of really trying to do that. And then, but then obviously, you know, Tomb Raider was this big part of this the evolution of the platformer, essentially, where, you know, you've got like this roving camera, and you've got like, you know, you can jump to the right, and, you know, it looks off screen like you can't see what's ahead of you. So it just completely changed the mindset around gaming, and that would eventually, of course, lead to games like Resident Evil with that isometric perspective, which, you know, you had that scene to scene transition. Games that I ended up actually, I think probably Resident Evil was the game that got me on board, to be honest. Because like I think there was just something about that game particularly that just like, yes, I understand now what everyone's been raving about, and then eventually that led me to other things. But I think that the sad thing for Tomb Raider for me was that I didn't get on that hype train immediately, and I think it was because of this sense of having to feel like I'm having to let go of something that I love very, very dearly. But when I think about the impact of what that game actually achieved, if I look back now, it was so important. Because it did bring in 3D gaming, it was the mascot that we needed at that point in time to revolutionize the industry and to have a focal point, because it was all Sonic and Mario, right? The side-scrolling platformers. Those games were so important for that era, and they obviously, Mario and Sonic obviously transitioned to 3D eventually as well. But at the time, they were very much stuck and rooted in that 8 to 16-bit era, and Tomb Raider was just this brash game that was coming in just saying, no, actually 32-bit is the way to go, and I think that created this, because I don't think I was the only one who probably felt this, right? I'm sure there were other people who felt like there was this strange shift happening, but when I look back on how Lara Croft was so important to being an ambassador for women in games, and to actually give some credence. So there are girl gamers out there, they play games, they love games just as much as men, just as much as boys. Why can't they talk about them? Why are they excluded from the playground? And having worked in the industry for the last 10 years in different roles, I can tell you the best people I've worked with, the best people I've had conversations with games about, are women more often than not, because they've always been there. They've always been playing these games. Like I said, my mother was playing games before I was playing games. There's nothing. It's a strange mindset that people have even still adopted to this day. Girls don't play Fortnite. Of course they play Fortnite. They play Roblox. They play anything, right? But I think having a mascot like Tomb Raider, having Lara Croft, they hate to call her a mascot, having a figurehead like Lara Croft really just revolutionized this and thinking and the mindset. And so the reason I say all this is because I was very anti Tomb Raider. I think I did eventually getting it. I can't remember exactly, because I think I just kind of bought into the hype because everyone kept saying, this is the greatest game ever, you have to play this. But I remember after playing it, I really wanted Tomb Raider 2. I had it as a Christmas gift. I think, like I mentioned, Resident Evil did change some of that mindset for me a little bit, because I was watching friends play that, and that made me think, oh my gosh, yeah, maybe this is the way to go. But it was Tomb Raider, the game that I physically bought on PC. Well, I didn't physically, my parents bought it for me. Had it on PC, and it made me think, yeah, I'm here now. I'm sold. I can drive I'm swimming in Venice, on the water in Venice. I'm on a hoverboat. I'm shooting at enemies from side to side. I'm jumping left to right. I am feeling Lara Croft is just at the height of cool at Tomb Raider 2. And I think at that point, it wasn't so much a generational shift at that point. It was like, this is the norm now. This is the standard. This is the bar. And you had a woman right front and center of that. And like I mentioned, if you look at old box art, it always had men on the cover. It was a lot of the time, like older games in the 80s and early 90s were kind of like trying to pander to what was relevant in the cinema, right? So there were games that were heavily inspired by Rambo and Total Recall, and and obviously Batman was a big part of that as well. And you had games like James Bond, and like games like that were all very men predominantly in those lead roles, right? So I think that as a result of that, games just kind of followed that trend and just accepted that was the that was the way to go. But with Lara Croft, I think Lara for a long time was still the main de facto, it's a woman as a protagonist in a game, it must be Lara Croft, so I think that even now, I think that mindset is still there. But obviously, we've got a lot of different better examples now. Obviously we've got Aloy in Horizon, and we've got the character in Forsaken, and Ellie in The Last of Us, right? We're seeing a change. It helped see a change, and I think the biggest thing, the most important thing, was what Tomb Raider was able to achieve, both in terms of ushering in this new 32-bit era, which, again, I was a bit anti and averse to, but it probably gave women this important space to finally be recognized and appreciated and acknowledged, and to be free to talk about it. And it wasn't just a game that women would talk about, it was a game that everyone was talking about. And that was the impact of Tomb Raider, and that was how important it was. And so celebrating it with this anniversary collection, as you're seeing here, is great. I mean, my experience of Tomb Raider 3 is not as deep and detailed. I think the first two games are, and it's probably the same for a lot of people, the first two games held something very important. I think I may have even skipped Tomb Raider 3 and then I went to like 4 on like the Dreamcast or something like that, and 5 after that. But I think regardless, you know, and obviously I've played the latest Tomb Raider games. They are absolutely phenomenal. I love them to bits. So I think, you know, these games were just, there was a part that childhood me just could not get. I could not accept. I refused. I was almost like gripping onto the edge of a ledge with my last dying breath. It's like, I will not let puzzle games go and pixel art go. And as it turns out, I was super foolish, because they're very back in fashion now, you know, and very much relevant and today as part of games that we all know and love. But you know, I think 3D gaming was a scary time and an exciting time for the games industry, and I think it changed a lot of things, and it changed the way that we look at things. It will always forever change the way we look at games, both in terms of the impact that it had for women, in terms of the impact that it had for, you know, the way the games were played and how they were played and how they looked, and it just ushered in this new era. And it kind of really, like, you know, I mentioned full motion video was also trying to become a thing at the time, and it just didn't really pan out that way. As it turns out, the brilliant Worlds Interactive are doing a magnificent job with that almost solely themselves right now. So, you know, if you love full motion video games, absolutely go and look at their library. They've got some stunning ones, really, really good stuff. But yeah, this is a bit of a strange one, because it is coming from personal experience, and it does talk about how Tomb Raider was important to me and how it also affected me. And, you know, it's kind of a mixed emotion in many respects, sort of the whole theme of what I've been talking about with these videos. But I came around to it, and in a big way, because I love Tomb Raider games. As mentioned, now I'm a massive advocate for them. I appreciate the impact that they've had more than ever. But at the time, I was very resistant to that change. And it felt very alien and odd to me, or young me, who was losing, who saw Sam & Max cancelled in real time and realised that Dig probably was the last LucasArts game, and maybe it was the last kind of... I remember there was a whole thing at the time, because the development cycle for these point-and-click adventures was becoming longer and longer and longer, and they weren't seeing that return on investment. So, you know, having been on this side of the business now, I understand it more and more, like, and I get it, you know, and it was a difficult thing to accept, I think, but it was for the greater good in many ways, because look at us now. Look at what, you know, look what this franchise has brought us. This iconic character, one of the most iconic gaming characters ever conceived. It has probably inspired women to get into the games industry, which is an absolutely hugely positive, incredible thing, and I'm grateful for. As I mentioned, I've got some incredible friends, work with some incredible colleagues who are all women, and you know, I'm so glad to have had them and met them in my life. And it's just in general, like, it's, look at what it's done to the gaming landscape. Look what that game particularly set, how it set the benchmark and where everything went once it was released, because everyone was kind of running to try and compete. So I think it was all multiple things happening at once, and it was just such an interesting game in many respects, because I think a lot of people look at it from one perspective or the other, but there are two competing perspectives there, two perspectives that kind of go hand in hand, and really just change, like, the way it affected everything that came before and came after. It's huge. So Lara, we love you. I think this is the sum up to say we love you. This is great. Obviously, as mentioned, there is also the Tomb Raider Anniversary Collection 4 to 6 as well. That recent, I think it came last year. So it's not just the 1 to 3. But yeah, check this out. This is available on all formats. You can pretty much get this anywhere now, which I think is amazing for preservation as well. I think, you know, we're in an era where gaming preservation is becoming more and more relevant by the day, and so making sure these games are still very playable is very important. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. This got a bit rambly, but there were lots of different things, lots of topics to dissect here, so I hope it was useful to someone. And yeah, keep enjoying Tomb Raiding, and we cannot wait to see where Lara goes next. See you soon.